The house stood quietly in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. It was a two-story home with a small white fence and a distinctive blue door. Melissa Clark sipped her coffee while looking out the kitchen window. She was a woman with chestnut hair that fell to her shoulders, and kind eyes that showed signs of fatigue. "Amy, breakfast is ready." In response to her voice, the sound of small footsteps came down the stairs. Melissa's daughter, Amy, was in 3rd grade. She was a child with adorable freckles and large eyes full of curiosity. "Good morning, Mom." Amy sat at the table and her eyes lit up at the pancakes Melissa had prepared. Having been a single mother for 6 years, Melissa had struggled to balance her work as a psychological counselor with raising her child. Even so, she treasured her days with Amy more than anything. In another part of Portland's suburbs lived Melissa's parents, Judith and Howard. Judith was a former high school teacher who now spent her retirement doing volunteer work in the community. Howard ran a real estate company and was still active in his career. They were contrasting in both appearance and personality. Judith always sought perfection, was sociable and energetic. Howard, on the other hand, was gentle and rather reserved. "Melissa called," Judith said while preparing tea in the kitchen. "We're invited to Amy's birthday party." "Is that so?" Howard replied, looking up from his newspaper. "You're going, right?" "Of course," Judith said, though she appeared somewhat reluctant. "But Carol had invited me to brunch that day." Melissa's sister Carol lived about 15 minutes from their parents' house with her husband Mark and their 8-year-old son Jake. Carol, who worked as a hairdresser, was always bright and cheerful, and was her parents' favorite, especially her mother's. "Why don't you go to both?" Howard offered a practical solution. "I suppose," Judith answered, though she clearly had no intention of adjusting her schedule. Melissa had complicated feelings about her parents' relationship with her and her sister, especially between her mother and sister. Since childhood, Carol had been the special one in the family. Talented, sociable, the child who met their parents' expectations. Melissa, meanwhile, had always been somewhat in the shadows. It deeply saddened her to see the same thing happening with her own child. As Amy's birthday approached, Melissa gathered her courage and called her mother. "Mom, will you come to Amy's birthday celebration?" "Yes, of course," Judith's voice was cheerful. "Is there anything I should prepare?" "No, just your presence is enough," Melissa felt relieved. "Amy is really looking forward to it." After hanging up, Melissa approached Amy in the living room. "Amy, Grandma and Grandpa are coming for your birthday." "Really?" Amy's face brightened, and she jumped up with joy. "Yay! Grandma's coming, it's been so long." Seeing her excitement, Melissa felt a pang in her heart. Amy had been longing for time with Judith this much. Indeed, Judith rarely attended Amy's school events. She often declined, saying she was busy. Yet, she always participated in Jake's events. Every time photos of her cheering for Jake at sports day were posted on social media, Melissa's heart ached. Nevertheless, Melissa always maintained a smile in front of Amy. "Grandma is busy," she would excuse, trying to protect Amy's sensitive heart. "I might make something for Grandma," Amy said, her eyes sparkling. "That's lovely. Grandma will surely be delighted." Melissa gently stroked Amy's head, praying that her mother would keep her promise this time. Amy's 10th birthday. She wanted it to be a special day. A few days later, as soon as Amy returned from school, she began crafting. Gathering colored paper, markers, and photos, she started making something. "A secret present," she said, not even showing it to Melissa. Looking at her serious profile, Melissa was once again moved by her daughter's pure affection. Did Amy realize Judith's coldness? Or was she still pretending not to notice? Either way, Melissa was determined to make the birthday a wonderful day. On the morning of Amy's birthday, Portland's sky was unusually clear. Sunlight streaming through the windows brightened the living room, making the colorful balloons hanging from the ceiling sparkle. Melissa had been up early preparing. A banner reading, "Happy Birthday Amy," decorated the table, along with cute paper plates and napkins. While waiting for a special chocolate cake to finish baking in the kitchen, Melissa checked the time. It was already 10 o'clock. Her parents had promised to come at 11. "Can I get dressed now?" Amy's voice called from upstairs. "Of course. Try on your new dress." When Amy came down the stairs, Melissa caught her breath. Dressed in a pale pink dress, her daughter looked a bit more grown-up than usual. She had small flower-shaped hairpins in her hair and wore a light lip gloss that she normally didn't use. "How do I look?" "Pretty?" Amy asked nervously. "You look perfect, Amy. Just like a princess." Amy beamed at Melissa's words and twirled around. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she exclaimed, "Oh, Grandma's present," and rushed back upstairs. She soon returned with a carefully wrapped square box in her hands. Melissa was surprised by how well it was wrapped. Amy must have practiced many times. She placed it in the center of the table. The attached card read, "To Grandma, from your loving granddaughter," in childish, round handwriting. "What's inside?" Melissa couldn't contain her curiosity. "It's a secret," Amy replied proudly. "But I worked really hard on it. I think Grandma will love it." Afterward, Amy sat in a chair by the window and began watching the street, looking for her grandparents' car. Melissa took the cake out of the oven and started decorating it. As she carefully placed 10 candles, she looked at her daughter's expectant profile and felt a small anxiety in her heart. 11 o'clock came, but there was no sign of Judith and Howard. As time passed, Melissa could see Amy's shoulders gradually drooping. "Grandma and Grandpa are late, aren't they?" Amy said, looking up from the window. "Yes, they might be caught in traffic." Melissa tried to sound cheerful, but her voice trembled slightly. By noon, there was still no word. Amy repeatedly asked, "When are Grandma and Grandpa coming?" And each time, Melissa answered, "Soon." However, anger was beginning to grow in her heart. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Melissa picked up her mobile phone and dialed her mother's number. After several rings, the call finally connected. The first sounds she heard were waves and cheerful laughter. "Hello?" Judith's voice came through. In the background, children's excited voices could be heard. "Mom? Where are you?" Melissa asked quietly, but with tension in her voice. "Oh, Melissa. I'm a bit busy right now. Can I call you back later?" "Amy's birthday party has already started," Melissa said through clenched teeth. "We're waiting for you." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. Then, Judith's light laughter came through. "Oh my, was that today? I completely forgot." Anger spread through Melissa's chest. Since she had the phone on speaker, Judith's words echoed throughout the room. Amy sat frozen on the sofa, not moving. "We're in Hawaii," Judith continued cheerfully. "On a family trip with Carol, Mark, and Jake. We're having so much fun." Melissa held the phone with trembling hands, searching for words. "But you promised." Amy was looking forward to it. "I'm sorry, but Jake really wanted to go to Hawaii." Judith's voice showed no sign of remorse. "I'm spending wonderful time with my darling grandson." At those words, Amy's expression changed. As if struck by someone, the color drained from her face. Her small body began to tremble slightly, and tears fell from her large eyes. "Why do you leave only me behind?" Amy's voice was shaking. "Am I not family to Grandma?" To that question, Judith on the other end of the phone could not answer. Instead, Jake's voice was heard in the background. "Grandma, hurry. I can see dolphins." Melissa pulled her daughter's shoulder closer with a hand trembling with sadness and anger. Amy's small body shook with sobs. Then, Melissa quietly hung up the phone. "Amy, listen." Melissa knelt in front of her daughter and placed her hands on her tear-stained cheeks. "You are my treasure. The most precious person in this world. Even if Grandma doesn't understand, I know how special you are." Amy remained silent, just burying her face in Melissa's chest and continuing to cry. Each time her small shoulders shook, Melissa's heart was torn with pain. The present for her grandmother placed on the table. That photo album, made over weeks, had now become a symbol of Amy's wounded heart. That night, after putting Amy to bed, Melissa returned to the living room. There were still traces of tears on her sleeping daughter's face. She picked up her mobile phone and looked at the pictures from today's events, the room decorated with balloons, the homemade cake, and Amy in her grief. Unable to sleep due to anger and sadness, she made a decision. She decided to post the photos along with the content of the phone conversation on social media. "Today was my daughter's 10th birthday," she typed. Her grandmother said she forgot while traveling with another grandchild. My daughter asked, "Am I not family?" Before pressing the post button, Melissa hesitated for a moment. But remembering her daughter's hurt expression, she strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just venting anger. It was a quiet protest against the unfair treatment that had gone on for too long. When she pressed the post button, she felt a little lighter. Tomorrow, she would have to show a smile again for Amy's sake. But just for tonight, she wanted someone to hear this sadness and anger. Under the blue sky and sea of Hawaii, Judith sat on the beach with her grandson Jake. They were collecting seashells and building a small sand castle. Judith tried to savor the perfection of this moment as she watched Jake's smile. However, somewhere in the corner of her mind, there was a sense of discomfort. She hadn't completely forgotten about Amy's birthday. Rather, she might have consciously set it aside. "Grandma, look." Jake proudly held up a star-shaped shell he had found. "That's lovely, Jake," Judith smiled, but somehow felt a heaviness in her chest. That evening, when she checked her mobile phone in the hotel room, Judith noticed a strange message from a friend. It was from Rose, a church companion. "Judy, are you okay? Did something happen? I saw on social media." Judith frowned. What was she talking about? Scrolling through her smartphone, she found several other similar messages. "I'll check it later," she told herself, putting down the phone. She decided to enjoy the final day of the family vacation. The morning after returning to Portland, Judith headed to the community center for her usual volunteer activities. For years, she had been hosting a book club and cooking classes for seniors. When she entered the center, her usual companions were gathered, but as soon as she entered the room, the conversation stopped. "Good morning, everyone," Judith greeted cheerfully, but the response was cold. During the book club, the looks directed at her were different. Judgmental, sometimes pitying looks. At lunch, friends who normally sat with her chose a different table. "What happened?" Judith asked Barbara, a longtime friend, as she was leaving. Barbara bit her lip uncomfortably. "Everyone knows about the social media thing. It's not like you to discriminate between grandchildren." "What are you talking about?" Judith was genuinely confused. Melissa's post. About Amy's birthday. Upon returning home, Judith quickly opened her computer and logged into her social media account. There, she found Melissa's post. A room decorated with balloons. A homemade cake. And what pierced her heart most was the photo of Amy in tears. Beside it were the details of their phone conversation. Her words, "I forgot." Her description of Jake as her darling grandson. And Amy's heart-wrenching question, "Am I not family?" The post already had thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. Judith covered her mouth with a trembling hand as she stared at the screen. This was the cause of her social isolation. She took a deep breath and called her husband. "Howard, look at this," she pointed to the computer screen. Howard read the post in silence, his face changing. "What have you done?" His voice was low, containing controlled anger. "To forget Amy's birthday." "I didn't forget," Judith protested weakly. "I just what?" There was a deep disappointment in Howard's eyes. "Not valuing family. I'm ashamed too." Judith tried to make excuses, but couldn't find the words. Her phone rang, and looking at the screen, she saw it was from her sister Carol. "Carol, what is it?" Judith answered the phone. "I saw the post." Carol's voice was tense. "I had no idea Amy was so hurt. We invited you to Hawaii, but I should have mentioned it was Amy's birthday." "You knew too?" Judith gasped. "Of course. She always calls with a reminder a week before her birthday. I heard it too." With these words, something inside Judith crumbled. She hadn't really forgotten. She had known somewhere in her heart. "What should I do?" Judith asked in a trembling voice. "Apologize first," Carol said sternly. "And Mark and I had noticed that you prioritized Jake over Amy. That's not right." After hanging up, Judith stood by the window, vaguely gazing at the scenery outside. For years, she had unconsciously discriminated against Amy. Why? Disappointment that Melissa had become a single mother at a young age? Or a preference for Carol's perfect family? The following Sunday, further shock awaited her at church. During the social time after the service, people who normally gathered around her were clearly keeping their distance. No one approached her. "Everyone saw the post," Judith whispered to her husband. "Yes," Howard answered briefly. He, too, was deeply hurt by his wife's actions. Upon returning home, Judith collapsed onto the living room sofa. The sense that her social standing, respect, and position in the community, things she had cherished, had crumbled overnight. Friends avoided her, her husband was disappointed, and even Carol was critical. However, what hurt most was Amy's face. That small, wounded expression wouldn't leave her mind. The question, "Am I not family to Grandma?" pierced her heart. Judith began to understand the gravity of her actions. There had been a serious problem in how she showed affection to her granddaughter. Melissa's post wasn't just venting anger, but a protest against years of unequal treatment. The next day, Judith spoke to her husband Howard. "I'm going to apologize to Melissa and Amy." Howard nodded silently. "That's the right decision. Will you come with me?" Judith asked anxiously. "No," Howard's voice was quiet but firm. "This is something you should do alone. If both of us go, it might overwhelm Amy. You should talk one-on-one first." Judith agreed with her husband's words. She went shopping and chose a birthday present for Amy. She considered expensive dolls and games, but ultimately chose a special locket where they could put their pictures together. Inside was engraved, "Always in my heart." "This isn't enough," Judith murmured, and made a reservation at a photo studio. For a special photo shoot with Amy. "If she forgives me," she wished. Upon returning home, Judith stood in front of the mirror, facing herself. A tired face, eyes filled with sadness and regret. And determination. She took a deep breath and set Melissa's home address in her navigation. "All I can do is apologize honestly and show through my future actions." As she drove, Judith hoped that today would be a new beginning. Even if Amy and Melissa wouldn't forgive her immediately, she wouldn't give up. She didn't mind how long it would take to repair the family bonds. Parking in front of Melissa's house, Judith sat there for a few minutes. A house with a small white fence and a blue door. She had visited a few times, but always for short periods. She took a deep breath, grabbed her handbag and the gift bag, and got out of the car. The few steps to the front door felt like a mile. Pressing the doorbell with trembling fingers. The sensation of her chest tightening with tension. The door opened, and Melissa appeared. Her expression was cold and hard, her eyes showed signs of fatigue. "Melissa, I want to talk," Judith said in a small voice. "What do you want now?" Melissa's voice mixed anger and hurt emotions. "I came to apologize. Would you let me see Amy too?" A moment of silence. Various emotions could be seen crossing in Melissa's eyes. Anger, hurt, and also a small hint of hope. She stepped back and widened the door. "Come in." There was no warmth in those words, but at least there was no rejection. Entering the living room, Amy was reading a book. When she looked up and saw her grandmother, her expression froze. She slowly closed the book and placed it on her lap. Judith tried to smile, but her words stuck in her throat at her granddaughter's cold gaze. The air in the room was heavy and tense. Melissa stood at the boundary between the kitchen and living room, arms crossed. She seemed to be watching every word, every movement. Judith approached Amy and held out the gift bag. "Happy birthday, I'm sorry I'm late." Amy didn't move. She wouldn't even make eye contact. "You don't have to accept it," Melissa said quietly. "Grandma just wants to talk, right?" Melissa's calm voice hit a blade of sarcasm. Judith placed the present on the coffee table and sat down on the edge of the sofa. "I'm truly sorry. To forget your birthday." "You didn't forget, did you?" Melissa's voice cut sharply. "I heard from Carol. When I called with a reminder, you were listening. You knew, and you ignored it." Judith was at a loss for words. She couldn't lie. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "Why?" Melissa's voice was trembling. "Why only Amy? Everyone started avoiding me." Judith began. "I saw the post on social media. I truly acted shamefully. You're just scared of how others see you." Melissa's voice was as cold as ice. "Are you really thinking about your granddaughter's feelings?" Judith tried to make excuses but swallowed her words when she saw the anger burning in Melissa's eyes. Melissa's voice began to rise. "It's always the same. You always prioritize my sister and Jake, putting me in Amy's second. Not just this time. You never came to Amy's school performances or sports days, but you always went to Jake's. Why? Aren't we family?" Emotions suppressed for years poured out like a flood. Melissa's voice trembled with anger and sadness. Amy quietly began to cry, wiping her eyes with her small fists. "Amy." Judith reached out to her granddaughter, but Amy pulled away. Melissa went to a closet and took out a box. She placed it on the coffee table. "Look at this." Melissa's voice was a bit calmer, but still full of emotion. Judith nervously opened the box. Inside was a handmade photo album. "Memories with Grandma" was written on the cover. As she turned the pages with trembling hands, she saw the few photos of her and Amy pasted inside. A distant shot from a sports day, a cutout from a family Christmas photo. And in places without photos, Amy had carefully drawn pictures. Images of grandmother and granddaughter. Walking hand in hand in the park, baking cookies together, imaginary scenes of things that had never actually happened, depicting Amy's wishes. "Amy spent 3 weeks making this," Melissa's voice echoed quietly. "Every day saying, I wonder if Grandma will like it." On the last page was written, "I love you, Grandma," in Amy's round handwriting. Seeing those words, tears overflowed from Judith's eyes. She sobbed, her voice choked. Judith said in a trembling voice. "I can't make excuses." "You're right." She turned towards Amy and slowly approached her. "Amy, Grandma did a terrible thing. I forgot your special birthday and hurt your heart. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I'll change from now on. You are my precious granddaughter." The room was wrapped in silence. Amy remained silent, staring at her grandmother. In her eyes was a mixture of confusion, sadness, and a small light that looked like hope. "Even if you say you'll change, how can we believe you?" Melissa asked. "After years of discriminatory treatment." "I understand," Judith answered honestly. "Words alone aren't enough. But I want to show it through my actions from now on. I'll attend all of Amy's school events. I'll regularly make time on weekends to spend with her. I want to be a real grandmother." "Mom, you always make promises like this." "This time is different." Judith looked at Melissa with serious eyes. I will never make the same mistake again. I'll cherish my time with Carol and Jake, but I'll cherish my time with Amy just as much. After a long silence, Amy said in a small voice, "Do you really like me?" At that pure question, the hearts of the adults in the room were stirred. Judith nodded, tears flowing. "I love you. I'm truly sorry I couldn't express it well until now." She slowly approached Amy and knelt before her granddaughter. "Look at this locket," she took a small box from the gift bag. "We can put our pictures inside. So I can always be with you." Amy received the locket with small hands and stared at it intently. "Also, I've made a reservation at a photo studio for next Saturday. I want to take special pictures of you and me. So we can add more real memories to that album." A small smile appeared on Amy's face. It was weak, but it was a sign of hope. Melissa maintained her stern expression, arms still crossed. "Show it through actions, not just words. It will take time to trust again." "I understand." Judith stood up and looked straight into Melissa's eyes. "From now on, I'll try to become a true family in the real sense. I'll never leave anyone behind again." At those words, the tension in Melissa's face eased a little. She looked at her daughter and nodded slightly. Amy quietly stood up, took the album from the table, and offered it to her grandmother. "This is for you." Her voice was still hurt, but a seed of forgiveness was sprouting there. Judith received the album with both hands and held it to her chest. "Thank you, Amy. I'll treasure it." As she was leaving, Judith turned back. "Can I come pick you up next Saturday?" Amy looked up at Melissa, and seeing her mother nod slightly, answered, "Yes." Before the door closed, Judith said once more, "I promise. I'll definitely come." She returned to her car and rested her forehead on the steering wheel. After a long sigh, she lifted her face with a determined expression. This wasn't an end, but a new beginning. It would take time to regain trust, but she had the rest of her life. And above all, it was time worth spending to repair her relationship with her granddaughter. "Amy, wake up. It's a special day." Melissa's voice traveled up the stairs. The morning sun shone through the gaps in the curtains, tinting Amy's room golden. Amy sat up, rubbing her eyes. Her 11th birthday. By her pillow was a small present Melissa had left the night before. At that moment, the door opened, and Judith entered with Melissa. The grandmother, wearing an apron, held a plate with a small cupcake. A single candle was lit on top. "Happy birthday, Amy." Judith's smile was warm, and her eyes showed joy. "Grandma." Amy jumped up in surprise. "You're already here." "Since 6 this morning," Melissa explained with a laugh. "Grandma is baking a special birthday cake." Many things had changed in this past year. Since that day of confrontation, Judith had kept her promises. She devoted every Saturday to spending time with Amy and never missed a school event. What began as a formal relationship gradually transformed into a genuine bond. The photo studio shoots became a monthly event, and Amy's album was filled with real memories. Photos of grandmother and granddaughter smiling, a day at the zoo, failures in cooking class, making Christmas cookies. Judith was also gradually regaining social trust. Although friends initially kept their distance, they began to notice her change. Church companions also gradually reaccepted her. Most importantly, family relationships were being repaired. Her husband Howard was proud of his wife's efforts, and their relationship with Carol's family had returned to how it was before. Except now, there was an important difference: both grandchildren were treated equally. In the kitchen, a large chocolate cake awaited completion. "Happy Birthday, Amy" was written in pink icing, and 11 candles stood ready. The living room was decorated with balloons and streamers that Melissa and Judith had put up together the night before. After breakfast, Amy picked up her necklace. Hanging from her neck was a locket containing smiling photos of her and Judith. "Grandma, I'm wearing this today too." "I'm glad." Judith gently stroked her granddaughter's hair. That night, after returning home from the birthday party, Judith opened her diary. It was a habit she had continued daily since a year ago. Today was Amy's 11th birthday. When I remember how much I hurt her last year, my chest still aches. The scars my insensitivity left on her heart won't easily disappear. But I can only fill them through my actions from now on. Karma. What you do always comes back to you. I never want to experience that loneliness and shame again. But without that, I might never have understood the true meaning of family or the value of my granddaughter. Judith put down her pen and looked out the window. It was a quiet night with twinkling stars. She touched the locket at her chest. Inside were photos of her and Amy. She wore the same one that Amy did. Family bonds are not a given, she whispered quietly. They must be nurtured and protected. She added to the last line of her diary. Amy's smile is the most precious gift in my life.